What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Jay Plays podcast. Happy St. Patrick's Day. This is episode 2. Still figuring out exactly how this podcast stuff works. Figuring out the pacing, structure, all of that good stuff. But hey, we'll figure it out as we go on. So let's get started. So, I got to try Zelda Breath of the Wild the other day at a friend's house. I didn't really expect to play this game anytime soon, mainly just because I don't have a Wii U, and I don't plan on getting a Switch quite yet. So, like I said in the last podcast, I liked how this game was looking so far. I'm not the biggest open world guy, and it's just not my type of game for the most part, but I can at least appreciate them. Usually trying them out at a friend's place. So, right, Breath of the Wild. I didn't start from the beginning or anything like that. I just wanted to try it out for a bit to see what it was like. So I had my friend start me up on his profile. One thing I liked about it right away that I didn't really think about until I had actually played it for myself is this feeling of mobility you get playing as Link. For the most part, in open world games, it's in this like FPS format, and you're walking around, maybe riding on a horse or something. But in Breath of the Wild, there's all these different ways to travel. You can glide in the air, you can use your shield to snowboard down mountains, you can scale just about anything, trees, walls, whatever. As long as you have enough stamina, you come up to a wall, you can just start climbing. And like these abilities combined with a third-person perspective made it feel more like an action platformer game inside of a huge open world rather than just the usual FPS style open world that you get, which I guess was a lot more appealing for me. I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with how other open world games are usually played. I just think this appeals to me more personally. But yeah, I tried fighting enemies, wandering around a bit. Everything felt pretty tight to me. I did have a little trouble getting used to the controls at first. The usual Zelda setup has been changed. For one, there's actually a jump button, which totally makes sense for traversing the world, but it's really different because none of the other Zelda games were like that. And then just the fact that I've never really used a Wii U controller. Well, I've used it before, but I don't ever play it. It took me a while to get used to. It's not overly complicated, and plus I said I was just playing on his account instead of starting from the beginning on my own, so there was a lot to learn all at once instead of being introduced gradually to these different elements. So in this game, instead of there being several large dungeons that make up the main game progression path, you have a ton of these little dungeons called shrines with smaller puzzles. And then I guess there's like 4 main dungeons or something like that. We visited one of the shrines and it had this puzzle that had to do with these constellations on the wall. And then there was a bunch of holes in the ground next to pillars where you could stick these orbs into. And for the longest time, we had no idea what we were doing. We tried all kinds of different things, like trying to form constellations using the orbs and all kinds of stuff. But after a while, we eventually figured it out, and something I always loved was that feeling of solving a puzzle that it just takes you forever to figure out, but then once you figure it out, it's just so satisfying. So I didn't get to see any other shrine puzzles, but if they're similar to that with different levels of difficulty, then I think that it's a really cool addition to the game. Another thing I got to do was help my friend find the Master Sword, which was really awesome. My friend knew that the sword was located somewhere in the Lost Woods area. I think it was the Lost Woods. But the only problem is that you need to follow a specific path, or else you get lost and you just end up starting from the beginning again. Much like the Lost Woods from the previous games. And he was having a lot of trouble, understandably, because they don't really give you many hints on where to go. Like at first you're following torches one by one, but that goes away eventually. And then I had this idea to follow the animals that you see, but that didn't always work. But eventually, after my friend had tried for a while, I asked him if I could give it a shot, and I'm not exactly sure how, but I just played carefully. I made sure not to go too far into the misty areas, and then somehow I found the path to the Master Sword. And then on top of that, he had enough hearts to pull it out without dying. Because apparently, if you haven't maximized your health out enough, it'll drain your hearts, and you won't be able to get the sword. So it was basically the perfect timing to be able to see the Master Sword in this new Zelda game. And then we even got a little bit of backstory from this game's Great Deku Tree. So that was really cool. I don't have much else to say. I enjoyed the game. I didn't encounter anything in it that I specifically didn't like. I still don't plan on getting it myself anytime soon, mainly just because, like I said, it's not really my kind of game overall. And I don't plan on getting a Wii U or Switch anytime in the near future, but I'll definitely try it again next time I visit my friend. Now, speaking of the Switch, I talked about it a little bit on the last episode of the podcast before it came out, and now I thought I'd talk a little more about it since it's been released. So first off, some good news is that apparently the Switch has been selling like hotcakes. I've read that not only is the Switch outselling the Wii U's initial release by a great deal, but apparently it's been even better than the original Wii, which sounds pretty crazy if that's true. It's still very early in its life, so things could easily change from here, but it seems so far that it's having a pretty good release. I'm sure a lot of this has to do with Zelda being a launch title, and it's also the only real notable game that's been released for the system so far. And Zelda 2 has also been selling like crazy, which is no real surprise considering it's Zelda, and it's doing a good job of getting those systems sold early until more games start coming out for it. On the bad side of the spectrum, there's been a number of complaints about the system. One being a straight up hardware problem where the left Joy-Con controller will become desynced while in dock mode. Apparently it isn't happening to most people, but it's happening to enough of them that there's a number of complaints. There's been some fixes posted online, whether they be long-term or short-term solutions, but overall it's really inexcusable. Nintendo's usually pretty well known for the quality of their product, so this is a little disappointing to hear about, and I'm hoping they're able to resolve this issue pretty soon. The other main problem that I've been seeing people talk about is that apparently people have been getting their screen scratched while taking the console in and out of the docking area, whatever you call that. Apparently it's not the screen itself being scratched, it's more like the outer black edges of the screen. And I don't know if this is simply a matter of people being a little too rough with the console, but still, once again, this seems like a pretty inexcusable design flaw on Nintendo's part. So yeah, that's not looking very good. This is another reason why I'm pretty hesitant with getting new consoles right when they come out, because in so many cases there's issues like this, either small or large, and it's just something that's usually corrected in later production runs. So for me, it's usually just wait and see, let them get any kinks out first, wait for some more titles to drop, wait for the price to drop, and then maybe grab one after that. But I know a lot of people don't have the patience for that, and rightfully so. The console should work just fine out of the box. So yeah, that's the Switch update for now. So moving on, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the new season of Samurai Jack. I already did a quick review of the Samurai Jack web games recently as like a special little thing to celebrate the return of the series. I guess it was pretty great timing because that thing got quite a lot of views compared to my usual stuff. But yeah, let's talk about the new episode. Samurai Jack back after 10 plus years for a final season to finally conclude the series. They had been planning for a long time to do a movie apparently, but it just never happened. And now, finally, after all this time, Samurai Jack is back to finish what it started, and it's on Adult Swim too. It has freedom with its violence. It has freedom to do darker tones. And these are things that you definitely see in this first episode. The last episode that came out before this was in like 2004, back when all the episodes were like in full screen for TV, because that's just how it was back then. But one thing I always liked about Samurai Jack is that they would have these wide shots, like just this cinematic wide shots of either the scenery or just action shot focusing on like a weapon or just anything like that. They would do all these cool types of shots that you wouldn't usually see in cartoons. And it was something I always liked. So the fact that it's back now with contemporary television's widescreen, it really just adds to that even more. They're able to do a lot more. The colors look great. The animation is really good. One cool thing about the animation is that it has this almost like 3D style to it sometimes, not a lot, but just once in a while. And it's not something that looks like it's CGI. It's almost like 2D that appears 3D. I don't really know how to explain it, but like it's used sparingly, and it really works when they do use it. Like the wheel turning on Jack's motorcycle at one point. But yeah, this is just the technical aspects. So let's talk about the actual episode itself. So it takes place 50 years after the last episode, which didn't leave off with a cliffhanger or anything like that. It's more just this passage of time type of thing and how this futuristic dystopian world has affected Jack after such a long period of time. So we have this new Jack he's tired, he's jaded, he's kind of going crazy. He's seeing his mom and his dad appearing everywhere, like in the river and like in the fireplace when he's just out camping with his fire. And they're just telling him that he abandoned them because he never returned to the past to help them out. He's just hallucinating about his village and his parents just all blaming their suffering on him. It's pretty disturbing, actually. It makes you really feel for Jack, and you could see that his time in the future has really affected him mentally. Then running alongside that, you have these 7 children that are supposed to be the daughters of Aku. I'm not really sure if this is just a title, like the daughters of Aku, or if it literally means that they have Aku's essence in them. Remember there were these robots from the original series. In one episode, they were created using Aku's essence, and they were extremely hard for Jack to kill. So I don't know if it's a situation like that or what, but anyway, these kids are basically trained from birth until they're adults with the sole purpose of killing Jack. They're just bred to be killing machines. And you could also, I like how you could tell they're focusing on one of the daughters in particular, because they've been raised in a dark cave. Like that's all they know their whole life. And one day, one of them sees sunlight outside from like a crack in the cave wall, and she like looks outside and she sees the nature and she like smiles, but then she gets punished for doing that and she goes back to training. So maybe she'll be conflicted or end up defecting and helping Jack in the end. Who knows? But yeah, eventually these daughters of Aku grow up, and by the time they've matured, they've just become these super killers. Going back to Jack, the main guy that he fights in this episode is this Pied Piper robot dude. He's kind of got this flamboyant, showboaty attitude going on. He kind of sounds like, I think he's voiced by Tom Kenny, the voice actor for SpongeBob and Ice King and Adventure Time, a lot of other voices. But he just has this, I'm pretty sure it's Tom Kenny, he has that like, Samurai Jack, hey baby, like, I can't do it obviously, but he just has like that sort of thing going on. He's a pretty cool character. He's got a nice design. The coolest part of him is probably his weapons. He has this flute that controls rocks and stone structures, and it creates these rock golems that Jack has to fight. And then he also has this big sword that he controls by scatting, scat singing. And then his coolest weapon is this tuning fork knife dagger type thing. And whatever he hits it with, the sonic vibration causes the thing to explode. Like for instance, Jack will block a strike from this weapon with his own knife, but then you hear this high-pitched noise and then boom, it explodes in his hand. It's a really awesome concept. And this character overall was just a great antagonist to start off the series with, because it's just such a creative idea. Another thing is we see Jack using all these different weapons and technology that he wouldn't have really used previously. Oh, and then something that the Pied Piper robot brings up is he asks Jack where his sword is. And if you've watched the original series, you'll know that Jack's sword is his main weapon. It's his family sword, like his most prized possession. And as far as we know, it's the only way that Aku can be defeated. And when the robot asks him about it, we get this flashback of Jack dropping his sword into a cave or like a crack in the floor. So yeah, I don't know, if Jack's sword is lost, then that's pretty messed up. That'll probably be a big plot point. Another part I liked about this scene that I didn't notice until another viewing was when the robot asks him about his sword, he has his hand on the hilt of his tuning fork, which I guess means he had planned on blowing up Jack's sword with it. Yeah, overall, it's just the episode was really cool. It had cool character concepts. This darker story seems to have more stakes to it. So far, this final season is shaping up to be really good, and I'm really excited to watch the next episode, which is coming out tomorrow, actually. Oh, I also forgot to mention, there's this shadowy samurai figure that has like antlers that Jack keeps seeing in his hallucinations, and we don't know who he is yet. But Jack just keeps seeing him, and he's really scared, and I'm really interested to see what that ends up being. Maybe that's the enemy that made Jack lose his sword, and he's carrying it now. I have no idea, so I'm curious to see what that's all about. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the next episode. Okay, getting near the end here, this is the segment where I answer questions asked in the comment section of the previous episode. What did you guys think of the structure, by the way? Right now, it's basically just open with video game related stuff. After that, talk more about other media, miscellaneous topics, and then just end with answering questions from fans. That's sort of what I'm looking to do right now. If you guys have other suggestions, let me know. But yeah, so let's get to this question. Stephen Wilds asks, what is your favorite Resident Evil game? And which Resident Evil game is the easiest? Alright, thank you, Stephen. That's actually a really good question. Resident Evil is actually one of my favorite video game franchises. RE7 was one of the very few newer games that I was looking forward to. I actually ordered a copy of it off Amazon for cheap a couple weeks ago, and it still hasn't been shipped by the seller, so unfortunately I haven't been able to play the actual game yet. I'm starting to feel like I got scammed or something, but whatever. Anyway, back to the question. It's kind of hard to say what my favorite Resident Evil game is. Mainly just because there's such a style shift from the original 3 games and then the later ones. The older games having the more classic survival horror style to it, and then the later ones having more action elements added to it with like different degrees of success. If I had to pick my favorite, it would definitely be somewhere between Resident Evil 1 and 4. 4 in general is probably the better game, just in terms of control, story, visuals, enemies, replayability, just everything about that game is excellent in my opinion. Resident Evil 1, particularly the remake, just because the visual overhaul was really nice, is my favorite of the classic Resident Evil games. Probably my favorite survival horror game, like classic survival horror game. I just like it the most. I love the atmosphere of the mansion, the creepy experiments, the cool puzzles, the feeling helpless at times, and just having to strategize on how to get around enemies when you're low on ammo or low on health. Just all that good stuff. I even like the tank controls that so many people complain about. I think it just adds to the survival horror experience. I don't really look at it as bad controls. It can definitely feel clunky at times, especially if you haven't gotten used to them, but I think they work just fine, and you can master them well enough to get really good at the game. It just feels like another element that classic survival horror should have. And that's another reason actually why I like RE4 more than, say, RE5, is that I feel it did a better job at keeping with the survival horror aspect. Obviously, it's very different from the previous games, but it just blends the horror and action a lot better than 5 did. I feel like Resident Evil 5 started drifting a little too far away from the elements that are important in a Resident Evil title. And I don't think RE5 is a bad game, it's just not great. The most disappointing thing about it is probably that it's just similar enough to RE4 that it makes you regret that it didn't come out as good. But yeah, RE1 is my favorite in terms of the classic games, and RE4 maybe just beats it out as an overall game. I also have a soft spot for Code Veronica, which is the real Resident Evil 3, by the way. The RE3 Nemesis that we got was originally supposed to be a spin-off game, which makes sense since you're in Raccoon City again, and Code Veronica is a lot more interesting since you're on this prison island playing as a new character and all that. But I guess they just thought, well, Jill was a super popular character, let's just call it Nemesis RE3 since we can sell the fact that Jill is in the game. I don't know. Enough rambling about that. Second question. Easiest. For me personally, I might say RE4 is the easiest just because I played through it so many times and I've gotten used to it. though I might be a little rusty since it's been a while. But yeah, playing through that game in pro mode definitely solves that problem because pro mode is a lot harder. But if I had to say, based on the game itself, maybe Resident Evil 2, just because I remember beating it so quickly on my first try. Like, I was surprised at how short it was and how little I died compared to the first game. I still think it's a good game. I did think it was pretty easy, so RE2 might be my pick for that. So thanks for the question. I hope I gave a satisfying answer. If you want to hear your question answered on the next episode, then just leave your question in the comments. And if I can answer it, I'll probably do so in the next video. That's about it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave any suggestions on how to improve this or topics for the next episode below. And see you guys next time.